You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Athan Hristodulu.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. It is the 31st of December, the last day and last video of 2021, where we are doing a State of the Franchise video on none other than the 5-10 Seattle Seahawks, eliminated from playoff contention. We got a lot to get into about this team, so make sure if you enjoy what we're doing here, hit that like button. If you're a Seahawks fan, let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on the team. What do they need to build on? What do you like about the team? What do you dislike about the team? What do you think needs to change? What should stay the same? Give me all that conversation down below. I'd love to hear what you all think. I am not a Seahawks fan, but I have looked in the Seahawks quite a bit for this video, and I've picked out some building blocks and team needs. I'll be discussing some of the bigger points and things that are being brought up as we head into the end of the season here, but I always want to hear from the fans of these teams specifically that I'm talking to. So fire in that comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think of your team and how they fare going into the offseason. Now, let's get into this video, shall we? We are discussing, like I said, the state of the Seattle Seahawks. This is going to be an interesting conversation because the Seahawks are a team, in my opinion, that are much better than their record actually shows. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But before we start diving into like negative things and, some of the rumors and whatnot, and, who's going to be the coach, where's Russell Wilson going? Because obviously we got to talk that. I always like to start these videos off with some of the building blocks and start with some of the positives on the team and just kind of go over, the good things about the team and what they have to build off of going into the offseason and who I think are probably some of the key players that are going to be focal points to the success of the team going forward. So firstly, we'll start with the offensive side of the football, and the two big names that stand out to me have got to be, and they're fairly obvious ones in my opinion, they're wide receivers Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Lockett's 29. He'll still be effective with the way he plays. He is such a freak athlete, and he has such great hands, and he has been so good for the Seattle Seahawks and with his tenure that he's been there. 29 years old. He has at least another 2 or 3 good years left in him, in my opinion, at least. Then you have a guy like wide receiver DK Metcalf, 24 years old, obviously recently drafted within the last couple of years, not going anywhere anytime soon, I would have to imagine. The guy's a freak athlete. He's put up some really good numbers. I've seen some people try to argue him as a top 10 wide receiver, while I think he probably sits more somewhere in like the top 15 to 20, and that just depends on who you're talking to. He's definitely up there in the top receiver category when all is going well with this offense. The reason I only have these two guys listed from the offense is because the offensive line has been abysmal, and I don't really have too many positive things to say about them. The quarterback position, we'll discuss that later on. As for the running back position, Chris Carson went down with another injury again, and he has been gone for quite some time, and I don't really know just how deep that running back room really is. So if I was to really pick two serious building blocks on the offensive side of the football that you have, and just like guys that are going to be an impact on this team, it's got to be the two obvious ones in the wide receiver room. I really hope Tyler Lockett sticks around for the foreseeable future for Seattle's sake. I think him being paired with Metcalf is an awesome 1-2 punch in the receiving game. There's a potential that they lose Gerald Everett this season, so it only makes them both being there very much more important. But I love Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf as a pair. They are one of the more dominant wide receiver duos in the league, and they should definitely be stuck together for at least a foreseeable future. Now, for the defensive side of the football, I do have 3 guys picked out that are, in my opinion, one of them is one of the best at their position. The other 2 are guys that you might not realize are pretty high up in their positional rankings, but should definitely be discussed there. First one, an obvious one, Bobby Wagner. He is 31 years old. I don't really think that matters. He is one of those players that seems like he's probably going to be playing until he's like 35, 36 at a high level. This dude is an absolute freak of nature. He leads the league in tackles at 170, and he's not going to be a free agent until the 2023 offseason. So there is still some time with him being as the leader of that defense. And honestly, his play hasn't really slowed down. He is the commander and quarterback of that unit, and I don't really see any reason the Seahawks need to think about letting him go. I firmly expect that they're going to extend him for, if he's 31 now, and when his contract expires at the end of the 2023 offseason, another year or 2, I don't know what the number is exactly, I could see them keeping him around for another year or 2 on top of that. This is a guy that I think is going to finish as a Seattle Seahawk, and his play has not really slowed, so I don't really think there's any reason for him to be going anywhere. Then you have the other linebacker to discuss here, Jordan Brooks, 24 years old. He has 156 tackles. It's third best in the league. 2 of the top 5 leading tacklers in the NFL belong to Seattle. And that really speaks for how good this defense has actually been. They're only allowing roughly, I think it's like 20-ish points a game, give or take, which is actually fairly low. It's within the top 10 in the league. And when you think of the Seahawks and being 5-10, no one's really praising their defense right now. And I don't think really much of the team is getting much praise because they're 5-10. But I will say that this team has performed better than their record. And the defense has been fairly good at keeping teams out of the end zone. And I think their ability to slow the run and having such athletic linebackers has really helped them out. The other guy that's in the secondary that I think needs to get a shout out because I don't think I hear enough about him, and he's tied for first with 5 interceptions as a safety, Quandary Diggs. First among safeties, tied in picks. The guy's been fairly good in coverage, and I just don't think he's getting enough love, considering that, you know, the Seahawks are known for some pretty good safeties. You had Cam Chancellor, you had Earl Thomas. It's funny that, you know, somebody like Quandary Diggs, who's been fairly effective and has done a pretty solid job, I think per catch, it's like 11.3 yards per catch, which considering the safety is responsible for the deeper half of the entire field, that's a pretty low number for per catch average to be going his direction whenever he is letting up receptions. The dude's been really effective, very good, and again, the Seahawks have been a struggling team, and I don't think he's gotten quite the love that he deserves. The guy has been very impressive, and he's been a turnover machine, as you can tell by his 5 interceptions. Now, not a ton of building blocks to have been labeled out because the corners over there in Seattle are not great. There is not a ton of pass rush going on there as well, and this will kind of spin me into my team needs. I only have 3 listed, but realistically, you could probably throw 4th on there, and I think I might kind of clump one of them into just an entire group. The first one that I have is the most obvious of all of them, and it's got to be the offensive line. You're looking at 44 sacks allowed this season, which is 28th in the league. Russell Wilson is the most sacked quarterback by far since he has entered the league. The only person that was really rivaling him up until he ended up retiring was Andrew Luck, and now Russell Wilson's just running away with that number at this point. 44 sacks allowed. Obviously, he missed some time, so the number has been skewed a little bit, but regardless, the offense as a whole has allowed that 44 number. This was a problem going into the season. They brought in Gabe Jackson. That really did not make much of a difference because they're still bottom in the league in sacks allowed. There has to be a massive retooling on the offensive line going on this offseason. That's got to be their first and foremost biggest thing because the running game has even kind of struggled as well. So I don't want to just focus on just pass protection, but even just like creating lanes and things like that. The offense as a whole would really benefit from just a retooling of the offensive line. Get some young guys in there, find a veteran that ends up being a free agent. The salary cap is shooting up a significant amount this offseason, so teams will have a lot more money to play with. The Seahawks, if they're using that money to play with anything, it needs to be an offensive piece or offensive lineman piece, something like that. As for my second, and like I said, I initially just labeled this as edge rushers, but honestly, you could probably even argue you need to just find more impactful players on the D-line as a whole. 25th in sacks in the league is not going to be a great way to win football games. You got to put pressure on the quarterback. I'm not really impressed with anyone that they have rushing the quarterback at this point in time. Carlos Dunlap is getting old, but there's just a lot that they have to do, and you need a premier edge rusher. You need a guy like Myles Garrett, like TJ Watt, and obviously every single team doesn't have a guy like that, but I mean, you need a guy that's going to force 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sacks at least on a yearly basis, and I really just don't feel like the Seahawks have that right now, and they're having a real hard time even pressuring and getting after the quarterback, so that's definitely something that the Seahawks need to look at. And I initially just had edge written down here on my notes, but honestly, you could just argue the entire D-line could use a little bit of retooling, maybe get a little bit younger, get a little more energy and a little bit more aggressive. The next team need that I have listed on here, and you could argue that this one probably even needs to be higher than the D-line here because this is an ugly number that I'm spitting out here when I was doing the research on this team. Their top 3 cornerbacks in coverage snaps played are Sidney Jones, Hugo Amadi, and DJ Reed. They are ranked 26th in team interceptions, which is 8 altogether. 5 of those are coming from Quandary Diggs that we just mentioned earlier. The other 3, just from random secondary guys. I think one might be a linebacker. I can't remember off the top of my head. But out of their top 3 corners, who have the most snaps dropped back in coverage. They have a fat goose egg 0 interceptions off of 1,305 snaps in coverage combined between the 3 players when you add up their entire totals of all 3 of them dropping back. That is terrible. Absolutely terrible. This used to be a unit, the Legion of Boom. You did not want to throw to Richard Sherman, and even Brandon Browner was there, and even some of the younger guys when Shaq Griffin was there. You did not want to throw into this secondary. Now, you don't even have to be worried about their secondary being aggressive enough to get even 1 interception. Your top 3 corners have no picks this year, and they've dropped back a combined 1,300 times. Glaringly obvious position of need going into this offseason, if you ask me. Now, aside from building blocks, positions of need, and things like that, and I'm sure that there's more that you guys could mention. Maybe I'm wrong about those 3 that I just talked about. I don't know. From what I'm looking at when I look at the numbers and how this team has produced in those areas, those are the biggest ones in my opinion. If there's something else you think I missed, or maybe there's another position of need that you as a Seahawk fan are pounding the table for them to go after, please let me know. The first topic for the Seahawks that I want to discuss has got to be this one, and I think it's a good question to ask: rebuild or retool? Pete Carroll just the other day was asked the question on a podcast. What does he think the team needs to do? And Pete Carroll does not believe the team needs to blow things up and start a full blown rebuild. He really thinks that they need to retool. Hence my question: rebuild or retool? One thing I do have to say is that this team reminds me a lot of like the Carolina Panthers from last year, in that they had not as many games. The Panthers had 8, but they had 5 games lost by 1 possession. So 7 points or less, 8 points or less, whatever you want to say, but 7 or 8 points or less. And on top of that, you have 5 wins. Granted, 2 of them are against the 49ers. 1 is against a playoff team in the Colts, and the 49ers are fighting for a playoff spot. They're in the playoffs right now as we speak. But then there is the couple of wins against the Texans and Jaguars. They've pretty much dominated the AFC South. The 5 games lost by 1 possession, though, if we're just speaking in hypotheticals, had they won, you're looking at a 10-5 playoff team, and a lot of these questions aren't even being asked. The issue more so is just that they're sitting at 5-10. There was a lot of drama at the beginning of the, in the offseason and into the beginning of the season with Russell Wilson getting hurt and Russell Wilson wanting to leave during the offseason, or what people were spinning it as. I feel like if a lot of the issues that were going on prior to the season and early on didn't happen, this conversation would not be as aggressive in the whole, does Russell Wilson have to go? Does Pete Carroll have to go? What do they need to do? Blah, blah, blah. A lot of it has been exasperated just because of media reporting, in my opinion. And we'll get a little bit more into what should happen with Carroll and Russell Wilson. But in terms of rebuilding and retooling, I kind of err on the side of what Pete Carroll's saying in the whole retool thing. Like I said, this team lost 5 games by a possession or less. They had a real good opportunity to be a 10-5 playoff team this year. And I mean, 2 of the losses that they had came when Russell Wilson wasn't even under center. So, I mean, there is a lot of if, ands, or buts that you can really look at. And, this is like looking at a cup half full type of glass here. But, the point still stands. As for things in terms of potential players that are going to be either gone or leaving and whatnot, the 4 that I identified here that are key free agents and that I think will make a significant difference in how this team looks going into next year. First one's Quandary Diggs. They got to bring the guy back. He's been a great safety for them. He is 28 years old, so he's getting close to 30, but he's not on the wrong side of 30 yet. The guy still probably has another couple of years, 3, maybe 4 left of some good football in him, especially at the safety position. They tend to preserve a little bit longer. But then you have Dwayne Brown, Athan Hristodulu, and right tackle Brandon Shell. Honestly, you could let them all go. And that might be controversial in my opinion, but or not in my opinion, in your opinion, it might be controversial. It may be in a lot of people's, it would be controversial. The reason I'm saying that is because this offensive line has been so bad, it has not even been worth the money. Athan Hristodulu, you might argue, has been fairly good for the Seahawks, but realistically speaking, none of these guys on the offensive line are a person that you would sorely miss if they're gone next season. I think they need to get younger. They need to get more athletic. And if there is any big ticket free agent out there that has been a proven year-over-year effective offensive lineman that they can bring into this unit to help make them a little bit nastier and a little bit more aggressive, they need to go after them. Just push the guys you have aside that are, potentially gone and just let them go, in my opinion. The last thing that I really want to talk about here is what the hell are they going to do with Jamal Adams? I pulled up the numbers here because I was curious of how this is looking right now, year over year since his very first season in the NFL. He had 538 snaps playing in the box his very first season, and since then the number has dropped about 50 to 80 snaps or so per year. He went from 538 to 489 to 400 exact to 351, and then only 287 snaps this year. I would say his least effective play has come in the last couple of years, and it's because he's playing less in the box. Jamal Adams is not your tradition. He's not an Ed Reed. All right, he's an in-the-box safety, a thumper, a guy that's going to force turnovers. At one point, what was it? He had I forget how many forced fumbles he had, but the guy was a playmaker, and maybe he didn't have the interceptions to boot with it, and maybe he is making a little too much money, but the guy was forcing turnovers. He was effective, and people were taking notice. They need to get back to putting him in the position that he plays more comfortably. I understand you have a guy like Bobby Wagner, and Jordan Brooks is even stepping up, but if you're going to have a big-ticket guy like Jamal Adams making all that money, just play to his strengths. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we taking him out of the box when it's very clear he's playing in that area less and less, and it's degrading his performance? Play him to his strengths and let him be that run-stuffing, hard-hitting, fumble-forcing free safety that he's supposed to be. It's like people think it's not that he's not good at football. He plays the game a certain way. Look at what other coaches do with players that have strengths. They play to their strengths. I don't know. Look at what Belichick does. Obviously, Pete Carroll's not Belichick, but the point still stands. Play to his strengths. Get your money's worth out of him. Now, the whole Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, who goes? Both, one or the other, maybe neither. My vote is neither. The reason why is because this past season, and it's already been talked about 100 times, but it has to be mentioned, has been the first losing season of the Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson era. You cannot just replace a coach or a quarterback that easy in the NFL and find success. You just can't, especially when you have a combo that has been very successful the last 10 or so years. One poor season doesn't really negate everything that they have done so far, which is multiple playoff appearances, division titles, Super Bowl appearances, and a Super Bowl title win. You can argue it's been a while since all that happened. Well, I mean, behind typically every Super Bowl title is a fairly good defense. And while the defense has not been great in Seattle as of late, if they can find some pieces and get back to that and build an offensive line that actually functions, I feel that this team can get right back to being a competitor in the playoffs. Again, they lost 5 games by 1 possession this year. They could very easily have been a 10-5 team, and I wouldn't even be having this discussion with you guys because they'd be a playoff team and not in my list of teams that need to be discussed because of how inefficient they've been. So, I guess the big question with it, though, really just boils down to how much does Russell Wilson want to leave, if he wants to leave, or if he even wants to leave at all. That'll be something that remains to be seen, but in my opinion, Pete Carroll has done such a great job with his team. Russell Wilson has obviously been a great quarterback for the last 10-odd years, and up until this year, a lot of people argued him as a top 3 quarterback. I would definitely have that conversation as well, because I think there is definitely some merit to how well he has played. The whole let Russ cook wave that kind of flew through social media, I think has kind of bit them in the, bit them in the butt because of that. But ultimately, I still think Wilson's a great quarterback. It's been a tough year injury-wise, and his offensive line has really just not given him any time at all to survive back there in the pocket, or Geno Smith when he was playing for them as well. But if he doesn't want to be there, forcing a relationship is not going to work. So I think a big question really is, does he want to be there or does he want to go? As for my final thoughts and just kind of where I think the team stands here, While it's been a tough year for Seattle and maybe even a rough 2 years for the defense and maybe even like a strained relationship at this point, the track record speaks for itself. This has been a great team led by Russell Wilson on the offense, and Pete Carroll has been a great coach for this organization. I don't feel like Seattle is super far off from being a playoff team. I think that, again, they're a restructured O-line and a few defensive pieces away from, being even just in contention, not a Super Bowl team, but even just back in the contention. And, if they're making it to the playoffs again, I don't really think anyone's having this conversation anymore. As for the Russell Wilson trade stuff, I don't know if Russell Wilson's going to be there or not. Again, it boils down to how bad does he really want out and if he feels like this team wants him there or not and wants to actually listen to him and take his advice on some things. I can understand a quarterback wanting to have some input. A guy like Peyton Manning literally called shots on players all the time. Tom Brady left New England because he didn't have that same opportunity. I could see a quarterback, especially a well-respected one like Russell Wilson, who has been a part of the organization for so long, wanting to have some input, at least on the offensive side of the football, especially when it comes to the guys that are supposed to be protecting him. As for like the trade rumors, there's definitely some merit as to why the conversation keeps happening. I think the big thing that everyone needs to look at here is just, and I have it written in my notes right here, while I feel Wilson staying for the team is for the best, there is definitely a fact that there's a very clear out for Russell Wilson to be gone even as soon as this offseason. $26 million dead cap hit if he's gone pre-June 1st, and if they somehow ended up working something out post-June 1st, they could spread it out to $13 million over 2022 and 2023, and it really negates any sort of serious cap hit, especially with how much the number's supposed to rise this year. So, I mean, there's a big out for Russell Wilson, especially if they decide to keep him this year and then just move on from him next year. At that point, if they move on from him next year, like it's literally $13 million period, not being split over a couple years. So there's obviously some holes and hurdles to get by for the team, but I strongly feel like Wilson and Carroll have at least one more year left in Seattle, and it would make sense to go for that 1 year. I don't think this year went exactly as they were hoping. Injuries and poor offensive line play, kind of the two big things. If Russell Wilson has a healthy season, they retool the offensive line, get a few more pieces on the defense. They're right back in the hunt for the playoffs, in my opinion. I don't think they're too far behind from a lot of teams. This is probably one of the more talented losing record teams, in my opinion. If I was to throw that out there, that's what I would probably have to say about them. One of the more talented losing teams in the league. Let me know what you guys think about the Seahawks in the comment section down below. That's what I got for you guys. I will see you all in the next video in the new year. Have a good 31st and a happy new year.